Hello everyone, and welcome back to this video. In today's video, I'm going to be telling you all about making your own comic come to life. This advice will totally help you get the ball rolling on how to form, plan, and further those still pictures in your head. I'm going to present to you a few main tips and tricks that'll make your life easier for that brilliant imagination to comprehend. Oh, and before I forget, this is just my personal take. Feel free to go with whatever floats your boat. So, you want to start a comic? Let's begin with the basics. To begin, the two most important things you need to know for making a comic is, well, having an idea. Now don't worry, I'm going to touch on this point again. But for right now, I want to tell you that whether you have one character design planned out or an entire plot, you have to have an idea. Mind you, this doesn't have to be fully written out. It could be just as simple as a note scribbled down on a piece of paper. Whatever you do, at least end up having a concept. And for the second most important thing, and arguably even more important than the first tip, you need to know the dimensions of your comic. And what I mean by this is you need to know where you're posting your comic. Whether you're posting to Instagram, Webtoon, or even YouTube, to name a few, you need to know the canvas size so you aren't constantly formatting your pages. Personally, I use Instagram for my comic pages. Shameless plug, Atmospheric Crash, @GoToBeasyNight. So I use a square canvas because it saves me time for figuring out cropping. For something like Webtoon, they have a very long rectangular canvas, so that way your viewers can easily scroll through your comic on a phone. And for YouTube, they have a horizontal canvas, but you may need to do a bit more finagling to format your comic. Just doing some quick research can enlighten you on the canvas you need before posting, so make sure you know the dimensions of your comic before you even put pen to page. I've already given you two helpful tidbits that I assure will help in your comic making journey. So if these are helpful, make sure to like and subscribe, as this content takes a lot of effort to make, and I would appreciate if you could support. Let's get into the next tips that will elevate your comic creation. Now that we have the most two important things down, we need to start getting into the nitty-gritty. So I'm going to touch on my first point, having an idea. Now this idea doesn't have to be fully fleshed out. As I stated earlier, all you need is a general concept. The way I planned out Atmospheric Crash is I wrote down a small synopsis in my notes app, which was very quick and messy. Then, as I continued the comic, I planned the dialogue and actions as I went. I just find it easier to go off whatever's in my brain, rather than having to sit down and write a script for hours on end. Now, this may not work for you. Maybe you need to have an outline already in place, or beginning, middle, and end written out in a specific format. However you stay organized with your comic pages, it's always good to have a basic concept that you can always build on. Some good resources for planning a comic are Google Docs to plan and write dialogue. If you need something quick and convenient on the go, using your phone's Notes app is cool too. Trusty old pencil and paper works just as great too. It's time to move on to some new tips that I haven't told you yet. To continue, I suggest when you're making a comic, you should find your medium. By finding your medium, you need to figure out where you're going to be making these comic pages. Whether it's digital or traditional, you need to know what your materials are. If you're making a comic page digitally, you need to know what program you're using. I use Procreate, but there are many artists out there who use things like Clip Studio Paint and Ibis Paint, plus more. Or, if you're going to do traditionally, you need to know what materials you're going to use, like paper types, pens, markers, etc. Also, if you do a traditional comic page, you may need to know how to upload that to a digital place to easily share it with other people. Now that we've addressed art supplies and your comic concept, the following thing you should equate for is world building, character planning, and settings. For me, I would start with the world. My world was based off of a Warrior Cats alternate universe, or AU, so most of the world building was already set in stone. Things like having leaders, apprentices, medicine cats, these were already in place. However, I also did some additional world building, like what my plans would be, and how everyone would function in their particular roles. For you, world building will most likely be a bit more advanced. You have to lay out the rules of your world. Where does your world take place, past, present, or future? You'll have to figure out who does what in your world, and why is it significant? Do you have a magic system? Do you need magic? How do things grow and change in your world? What causes conflict? All of these things you should take into account in your comic. Moving on from world building, you need to figure out what your characters are doing/going, or if you're even going to have characters. Many comics usually feature some sort of protagonist or antagonist, but on the other hand, there are many different styles of comics, so no need to worry if you don't follow a traditional format. Maybe one of your characters is someone who's been sitting in your sketchbook for a long time. For example, the main character of my comic is currently named Sky Kit. His name will grow and change as the comic goes on, but originally Sky Kit was a character that I made up a long time ago, based off of a song I really liked. And that's just as deep as your character needs to be. Maybe your character has a ton of depth and lore, and that's great too. My main advice for making characters is don't make them too complicated design-wise. Remember, this is a comic, and you're going to be drawing that character hundreds and thousands of times. So whether they're an animal, human, alien, or robot, make sure that they're not extremely detailed, or else drawing comic pages may seem like a burden. But of course, you can do anything you like at the end of the day. And finally for this section, you need to know where your settings are. Settings can be anything, outside, indoor, outer space, or even at the bottom of the ocean. Whatever it may be, you need to know the general locations of where your characters are going. So for me, most of my characters are outdoors, and in the progression of my comic, they will most likely never be in an industrial setting, around people, buildings, and more. However, for instance, your comic may be based in the future, where there's a ton of technology, so you may want to familiarize yourself with drawing backgrounds, buildings, cars, anything that gives off a mechanical vibe. There are also assets out there that can help you. Having custom brushes, backgrounds that you can pull from reference photos can help speed up the comic making process. I personally have a tree brush that I use because I draw the outdoors often. I made that brush myself, which helps me with not spending too long on backgrounds. It speeds up the comic process because I put out a page every week. This perfectly segues into my next tip. What are you going to be putting out these comic pages? Whether you plan on publishing your comic as a book or just releasing it for fun, how often do you want to post? How many pages do you want to put out? As I stated before, I release 1 page a week, and that's just convenient for me. But for you, scheduling could let you put out multiple pages a week, or maybe you can only put out 1 per month. It doesn't really matter, just try to stick to a schedule, and that way you're able to maintain it over a long period of time. Sometimes making a comic can be a very long process, and you could be posting for years. Also, when are you going to have time to make these comic pages? Usually I make comic pages in bulk, so that way I can just release them as the weeks go by, and then make more as I'm already releasing chapters. This part here is going to be more of a subpoint, but I want to bring up the fact of assets again. There are many resources out there, and I've found a few that are helpful for me. I discussed the tree brush that I made earlier that helps me save time on things like backgrounds. I also have other custom brushes that make my life easier, such as my custom rectangle brush. This brush helps me seamlessly make comic panels, that way I can easily section out my art because I use Procreate, and it's not necessarily a program built for making comics. On the contrary, if you're using a program like Clip Studio Paint or Ibis Paint X, they do have built-in panels. I recommend looking up a few tutorials if you want to be informed about how your specific program handles comic making. Additionally, for complicated posing, I'd suggest websites as Just Sketch Me, which is helpful for specific poses or line of action, which builds your mental library of real people and objects. Not sponsored, by the way. I just thought I'd mention it because they're helpful websites, but I'm always open if you want to sponsor me. Besides, you can always just use good old-fashioned Google. Practically everything on the internet has the ability to help you in some way, and you don't necessarily have to know every single thing about anatomy, backgrounds, or brushes to get started on a comic. And well, starting. This is my final piece of advice, and it's the most important. Starting is the hardest part. And it's not necessarily committing to a page every week, the tools involved, posting, or even finding an audience. It's just trying to start, and that's how most projects go. Whether it's art or not, just trying to start a comic page is the hardest part, and I promise, once you get through that first page, it's going to be smooth sailing. At first, I thought no one would read Atmospheric Crash, and now I have a consistent set of followers who come back every Friday to see the page that I posted. And shout out to all of you guys, I really appreciate the support. But there's always going to be a following to look at your work. And if you take this statement with a grain of salt, you can really apply this to any story making. Whether you're just writing a book or storyboarding an animation, this advice can go for practically anything. So please, if you really enjoyed this informative video, I totally suggest using it to the best of your abilities. And there we have it, a fully fledged video on how you should start making your comic. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you enjoyed or want me to work on something. This is actually my fully first scripted video, so I would really appreciate it if you could give me some feedback. Check out a few other videos on my channels, as I'm sure you'll like them just as much as this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!